I think my talk builds really nicely on Claire's talk. So my first few slides, I'll really just give some headline messages. The journey to a national maternity safety ambition really has been building over the last 8 years. So maternity has featured in the NHS outcomes framework since 2010, particularly reducing term admissions to neonatal units, the National Audit Office report on maternity services, and then I think the report that really put maternity services in the spotlight was the Kirkup report, published almost 3 years ago. In 2015, autumn 2015, Secretary of State for Health announced his national ambition, and I think you could probably repeat it to me rather than me having to outline what that is, but reducing maternal neonatal death, neonatal brain injuries by 50% by 2025. And then in 2016, the publication of Better Births, the findings of the review of maternity, building on a year later, the autumn announcement of 2015 by another one in 2016, Safer Maternity Care, and you will know that in November of last year, the 2017 autumn announcement by Secretary of State on maternity safety progress and next steps. So a fantastic spotlight on maternity that I believe is unprecedented and probably won't be repeated in our lifetime. So a great opportunity to be part of that. And as Claire outlined, the National Maternity Ambition falls under the umbrella of the Maternity Transformation Programme, thereby cohesing all maternity activity under one umbrella. Claire's outlined the 9 work streams, and the programme Attain, which I'm about to detail next, falls under the work stream 2, promoting good practice for safer care. So what is Attain? Attain is an acronym for avoiding term admissions into neonatal units. It's a programme of work to reduce harm, so it was initiated through the outcomes framework, where it was recognised that increasing term admission rates was seen as a signal of suboptimal care somewhere in the maternal or intrapartum or postnatal period, on the understanding really that few term admissions should require admission to a neonatal unit. And it was seen as a signal that avoidable harm might have been caused. Although cost wasn't a factor, it wasn't a driver for the programme of work, it was supposed that there was potentially a significant avoidable cost, both to the NHS but also to families. And why is this important? Well, for the 3 reasons I've just outlined, but also I know from my own clinical practice that maternity and neonatal teams knew it was an issue, and there was a real will to try and resolve it, but it felt far too complicated. And some of that complexity was around the way we enter data on term admissions. There's some inconsistency about babies admitted to level 1, 2, and 3 care and those admitted to transitional care. It was around availability of transitional care facilities, where in many units there was no transitional care, so it was less easy to avoid admissions going into neonatal units. It was about variation in guidelines, admission policies and thresholds. It was about increasing complexity of maternal morbidity, a fail-safe mindset, better perhaps to send a baby who might have particular risk factors or vulnerability into a neonatal unit than perhaps leave it on a postnatal ward where midwifery staffing levels may not have allowed for really close oversight of that baby. So quite multifactorial, all felt to be in the far too difficult box to address. But really important, because mothers and babies have a physiological and an emotional need to be together immediately after birth, but also in the days that follow. And really, and I think this is so critical, the first hour outside the womb is the time when a family is formed. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And it's either when a family is formed or grows, and it should be cherished, it should be protected, because we can't ever reclaim that again. It's also important for physiological stability, adaptation to extrauterine life, and skin to skin, where the benefits extend beyond birth. That forms the foundation of breastfeeding, mom getting to know her baby's cues and being able to comfort and soothe her newborn. And there is overwhelming evidence that separating mother and baby soon after birth interrupts normal bonding, and that can have a profound and a long-lasting effect on maternal mental health, on breastfeeding, and thereby on long-term outcomes for mother and baby. And so our take-home message really was that preventing separation, except for compelling medical reasons, is really an essential practice in maternity services and our ethical responsibility. So where are we? What is the trajectory of term admissions? So the data I'm going to present to you is from an analysis between 2011 of admissions, 2011 to 2015. We're about to analyze admissions up until 2017, but unfortunately that wasn't ready for today's presentation. But term live births in England between 2011 and 2014 decreased by 3.6%. However, care days for term admissions increased tenfold, up to 31%. So that's 60% of the babies in our neonatal units are term babies. And people always need a bit of a sense check when I say that, because it feels as if our neonatal units are full of preterm babies because they are there, often for a prolonged period of time, often for weeks, whereas our term babies are sometimes only there for hours or perhaps a day or two. So the fact that 60% of our neonatal capacity relates to term admissions is quite sobering. So what do we know? So we analysed the admissions of 136,000 babies who were admitted between 2013 and 2015. And around 8.8% of all term live births resulted in an admission to either special care, high dependency, or intensive care. So level 1, 2, or 3 care, not transitional care and not neonatal care delivered on a postnatal ward. And in 2015, we delivered 10,000 additional care days for term admissions than those in 2011. And most of that care was delivered in special care, so not the higher levels of care, but in special care. And when we looked at the level of intervention that those babies received, around 20 to 30% of those babies didn't receive an intervention that couldn't have been delivered by keeping them next to their mother. So a couple of examples of that is receiving phototherapy or receiving intravenous antibiotics. So we separated them to have those interventions, but on a neonatal unit. And when we actually drill down on actual numbers and imagine how many families have been affected, somewhere between 30 and 40,000 families, so around 13,000 families per year were affected, mothers and babies potentially avoidably separated. And we know that the factors contributing to that were unnecessary intervention, particularly screening for hypoglycemia, often within the first hour or two of birth, not identifying predisposing risk factors, evidence-based guidance not being followed, and a new finding, which has been helpful, that babies born at the lower threshold of term were twice as likely to be admitted to a neonatal service than those more mature term babies. And so just to put this into some sort of practical context, a couple of examples from the inpatient setting as well as the community. So babies admitted for the primary reason of hypoglycemia, well, 39, so almost 40% of babies were low risk. So they had no risk factors for hypoglycemia in terms of there were no obstetric or maternal problems, their birth weight was within the optimal range, and their APGARs were fine. And of those, 30% were admitted within 4 hours of birth. So there doesn't appear to be any indication to have intervened and to have undertaken a blood sugar. And yet, a sugar was taken. We picked up a completely normal transient fall in hypoglycemia. And having found that, we had to act on that. And they were then admitted to a neonatal unit. And half of those, 15%, were within the first hour of birth. So going back to my slide about that immediate postnatal period and the importance of skin to skin. And those admissions were from labour ward and theatre, and that provides us with a fabulous, provides us with a fabulous opportunity to really address what is our immediate post-delivery care and what part can we play in reducing those admissions. In relation to at-risk babies, so babies born to mothers with diabetes, 86%, so the majority, were admitted before 4 hours of age. And when they were admitted, 40% had an admission blood glucose above what was then the operationally accepted threshold of 2.6. So again, a real feel of prophylactic admissions. This is a vulnerable baby. Let's just send them to the neonatal unit rather than have them potentially deteriorate on a busy postnatal ward or in labour ward. So really suggestive of prophylactic admissions. A community example, so around 6% of term admissions were admitted for jaundice. It's very common, around 3,000 per year. And it was the most common reason for admission from home. So that does make sense. And obviously, when women and babies are being transferred into the community within 6 hours, some will inevitably develop jaundice and some will need to come back in for intervention. But interestingly, babies admitted from home were admitted around day 5, so in keeping with the day 5 blood spot screen, rather than babies who were admitted as inpatients where their admission was around day 2. The majority received phototherapy only, and a new finding again that admission for jaundice was more likely, again in the lower threshold of term, male babies, those of Asian ethnicity, or one of a multiple birth. So just some helpful signposting for particular vulnerability. And our overall data findings that were, again, to repeat, 20 to 30% of all babies admitted to special care, high dependency, or intensive care received no intervention which couldn't have been delivered by keeping them with their mums. Around a third were admitted for less than 48 hours. So those of you who are familiar with Badgernet, which is the system we use to analyze the data, captures admission length of stay per day by, I suppose it's easier to explain. So if a baby's admitted at 5 to midnight, that will count as an entire day, even though the baby potentially only had 5 minutes. So many of the babies we reviewed were admitted for less than 48 hours, suggesting just over 24 hours. And they received no high dependency or intensive care intervention. And so our data really started telling us that there was less harm. We were not causing significant harm to babies, but we were separating them needlessly. And there was a real role here for transitional care. So we collated all these findings into a resource pack, which we issued a year ago as a patient safety alert, which went to all trusts. And we started drawing on some of the national drivers to really embed this work, to highlight it, and to really take action. So Attain was included in the 2016 Safer Maternity Care Action Plan. It's a formal deliverable within Workstream 2, the Maternity Safety Programme. The Patient Safety Alert mandated action on that. And soon after, NHS England identified Attain as a potential improving value scheme, which is around cost savings. That's been developed, and we're doing a series of roadshows to launch that. We were able to influence the inclusion of term admissions within the neonatal audit programme, and that's been a question since January of last year. And term admissions have been included in the maternity clinical indicators set, which sits under Workstream 6. The National Maternal and Perinatal Audit has a specific sprint audit looking at term admissions, and we were absolutely thrilled that Secretary of State's November 2017 announcement also included a focus on Attain and specifically the e-learning programme. So some of the opportunities that NHS Improvement have taken to spread the learning is to really share what we know as widely as possible. So we've developed an NHS Improvement webpage, a bespoke term admission webpage, where we have a plethora of resources for sharing. So some will have been a collation or a curation of work that you will have done that is on the web page, but others are academic publications from insights from our work. We've made sure that all academic publications are open access so that you can have them freely available. I've mentioned the Improving Value Scheme that will be rolled out now across the country. And drawing on Claire's point around focus on postnatal care, influencing improvements in postnatal care, particularly through keeping mother and baby together, skin to skin, avoiding unnecessary intervention. Through the Workstream 5, working with Health Education England around transforming the workforce, so being really clear about what we need to do around workforce numbers, but also training and skills to be able to fully implement, attain, and transitional care, and working with our 2 Royal College partners, Royal College of Midwives, Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, developing a labour ward leaders programme and also developing guidance on huddles and handovers to really address some of the factors, predisposing factors to babies being admitted for hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. We developed, in collaboration with some of you within the room today, an e-learning for Health Attain program. It has 8 sessions. It was launched by Secretary of State. It's freely available. It could become part of mandatory training. It's an absolutely fantastic resource. It includes videos, quizzes. It's really jazzy. It's great. So please do make the most of that. We are drawing on the Maternal Neonatal Health Safety Collaborative Programme, which is another deliverable within Workstream 2. It's the how to go about doing all these improvements. And Attain is embedding Attain is being supported through the collaborative programme, where around 50% of trusts involved in Wave 1 have been doing some aspect of Attain, particularly hypothermia and hypoglycemia. So really fantastic that all of these initiatives are complementing each other. We've also collated a number of resources and case studies on transitional care, so that even if you don't have a bespoke footprint that you can set up transitional care, you might want to draw on a case study that uses a virtual outreach type model. And really the political interest has been invaluable. We've been able to influence strategy and policy through having that. So again, that once in a lifetime type of opportunity. And so just in drawing to a close, something really tangible for you to take back with you. So what could your role be? So undertake the e-learning program and then go on to reflect around your current practice and how you might do things differently. And I think particularly around admissions for hypoglycemia. So familiarize yourself with the framework for practice, which we developed as a result of our findings. We developed that with the British Association of Perinatal Medicine. It aims to standardize care across the country. It has some new thresholds for admission. Some are quite, I think, are seen to be quite bold, but nonetheless, it offers an opportunity to standardize practice for our babies and our families. And then draw on the resource pack, which we issued as part of the alert last year, and discuss with the leads in your unit who might be leading on Attain where you are with progress with that. When you do know what your local issues are, work with your colleagues to really address those findings. You might find that you have 2 or 3 issues that require addressing, perhaps some in the community, handheld bilirubinometers, perhaps managing hypoglycemia. Understand what those are and then use the resource pack to help address those. And then really, really support the call for keeping mother and baby together. And just a word of caution that this should not be at any cost. I would be horrified to feel that we kept mother and baby together to such an extent that a baby who actually needed a higher level of care didn't receive that care. So some caution. And then I think really maintain that questioning mindset. I guess I wrote this point for the student midwives in the room who perhaps are exposed to different settings, different care settings, different units, different ways of going about things. Bring those fresh insights into your unit. You have that unique opportunity, and maintain questioning, are we really doing the best for our babies? And I've outlined the journey we've had to date, but where do we go from here? So I think this is a bit of a personal crusade for me, and I think the stopping point for me will be when we're at the same point as we are in paediatric services, where it will be absolutely unthinkable not to have service and staffing models which keep mother and baby together. And the very last thing you can do is come and join the journey. Follow us on Twitter, follow us on the NHS website, but join the journey. Thank you.